Welcome to the Church Dropout Podcast. My name is Alan. I'm the host. Church Dropout is a podcast. We talk about issues, topics, and teachings related to faith, life, and culture in ways that are sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always insightful. If you have not already, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Keep the conversation moving forward. One of the things that, that has been really interesting to me and that I've thought about a lot, and to be honest with you, this is one of the things that people ask questions about the most, is how to find authentic community, And what's particularly telling about this is most of the people that ask, majority of the people that ask the question, my response is, I ask the question back, are they involved in a gathering community? They say yes. And when I ask, how long you've been there, they've been there for a while, right? It's not like they just went there but they've been there a while and they're struggling to find community, all while being a part of a community. And what sparked me to just have this conversation now is a good friend of mine, shout out to Josh, sent me a poll that another podcast had put out, and I won't say the name of that podcast because they may be wanting to talk about it or something like that. I don't want to get to it before they do. I don't know. But they did a survey on what is the hardest part about being a Christian in today's culture. What's the hardest part about being a Christian in today's culture? And the categories were, or the voting categories were: standing firm in belief, dealing with judgment from others, finding community, and avoiding compromise. And the top spot went to avoiding compromise with 42% of the votes, but in second place, by only a few percentages, was finding community. And I mean, avoiding compromise is an interesting topic as well. But the second one was finding community, which was a few percentages behind. And it's interesting to me, right? And to me, it's very concerning, right? Why are people who attend a community gathering regularly involved in that community as far as, small groups and different things of that sort, but yet are still struggling to find community, or they find community outside of that community, although they still attend, they find community outside of that community. Why is this happening? Right? Like, it's kind of like that feeling of, you're in the midst of a crowd, but you still feel alone, right? Like, there's people around you, right? A lot of people around you, right? But you still feel alone, right? And a lot of that has to do with being known, and truly known, right? And being able to fully unfold who you are and different things of that sort. But why is that? This is a problem, right? Because, people will say, who are deeply involved in, the current church models that are out there, that churches are thriving and people are coming more than usual. And that could be true, right? Membership can be up. But the question really is are people engaged? Are people engaged? Attendance is not participation. Attendance is just attendance. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how many times I went to a gathering on a Sunday and was thinking about what we're going to eat after the gathering. Listen, I'm present there. I'm physically there, but my mind is not there, right? Just because someone is there doesn't mean that they're engaged. And I think we can assume that people are engaged within community, but they're finding community in other spaces. I remember, when I was working for a church community, and we have faithful members of this particular body that were, attending regularly, involved in other areas of aspects of the church in terms of service and different things of that sort. And, but they were going to this, weekly, I guess, study or something like that. And, in opposed to what was being offered during the week by this particular community. Right. And when I asked a few of them, what it was, and that was attractive about that and not attractive about this is, it was the connection, and in particular, it was the connection without judgment, being able to be fully transparent without the fear of judgment. Right. It wasn't that they had a problem with, it wasn't that they had a problem with confession, right? It was just being able to be vulnerable in community. And unfortunately, they didn't feel like it was comfortable enough. They were comfortable enough to do this inside their own community. Now, let's just be real. For some people, there is an avoidance of accountability, right? Like, it's easier to go outside the church I'm using church in the terms of our culture. It's easy to go outside of the gathering that you're committed to find, it's easier to go to a gathering, or a group outside of the current community you're in, because, you can't escape accountability in terms of, if you're leading there, if you're, a church discipline or whatever that may look like. I get that. There is that. But I think there's a deeper issue too. Like, I don't think that every case is that. I don't think that every case is someone trying to avoid authority within their specific community that they gather in. I think there's a deeper issue here within church culture, that people are feeling like, that the church is amiss when it comes to finding community, that, the church is, the current church model that we participate in is void of authentic, deep, real community, right? And a lot of this has to do with the church being Sunday focused, right? Everything that the church does is generally, all the energy is generally poured into the Sunday experience. And this is with every church. I don't care if it's deeply reformed. I don't care if it has very strict liturgical ideals and all of that like listen, every church puts more emphasis on Sunday. Right? Majority of the work week for the staff is spent on Sunday. I mean, you've heard pastors say they spend excess of 30 hours on a sermon that they're going to preach 30 minutes on. That's crazy. An hour for every minute that you're going to preach. That's just crazy. Right? And mainly because, people hardly remember anything from messages, but nobody wants to talk about that. But, pastors will spend 30 plus hours. Some pastors will spend 30 plus hours, cultivating a message. And that would include prayer, all those type things, cultivating a message and to be delivered on Sunday in a 30-minute, 40-minute, whatever minute window, as well as like all of the music aspect, the service aspect in terms of ushers and all of that type stuff, individuals that are helping out with that parking lot, like all the energy is really focused on Sunday, right? This one experience or event. Everything is tied into that. So there's usually very little energy that's poured into what happens during the week, right? And we kind of have trained people, to be honest with you, to think that Sunday is the pinnacle of our worship week, right? That is the pinnacle of the week, right? So it's not what we do in between Sundays; it's what we do on Sunday, right? And so the way we gather is not really pushing authentic community. One reason is I would say that the whole environment is not set up for community engagement. I mean, you're sitting next to people and you're not facing one another, you're facing the stage, right? So the only interaction that you're truly getting is that which with those who are in front of you. And that's not even really interaction. You're usually being sung at, and although you participate in singing, you're being preached at, although you can participate in the preaching by, expression and stuff like that. But there's not a real communal aspect to it, right? Other than when they say, greet your neighbor. There's not any one anothering aside from those, areas of like I said, ushers and different things of that sort. There's really not a lot of one anothering, right? Even prayer, there's really not a lot of prayer that's happening, with one another. I was a part of a community where, during the service, instead of doing like a altar prayer, what they would do is they would say, hey, gather around with 3 or 4 people in your area. If there's something that there's needs or praise, let's just pray for one another, pray for this, pray for that, So there was an attempt to make it, more inclusive in terms of community in those moments. But the way Sunday is done, it's not really advantageous, or it's not really, advantageous in terms of building community. It's really, to be honest, everything that we do in a church culture is very individualistic. It's really, me centered. What I'm going to get out of this service, right? And for those who are giving, what I'm going to give to this, and it's a real individualistic experience, right? Sunday morning is, and so it's not really set up for that. It's not really set up for people to engage in authentic community. And then plus, it's hard to do with all of the things that are going on, all of the things that are happening. It's just not even the environment that you can build that. But then I know churches will do, small groups, and this is their way of making the church smaller, right? And I get the sentiment of that, but it's so interesting because churches have one of the biggest problems that a gathering community or a church has with small groups is actually getting people to be involved in them. You know what I mean? Like, churches will try anything, communities will try anything to get people to be involved in them, right? They will, say, you can't serve in any other auxiliary areas if you're not in a small group, right? They'll make small group mandatory and all of that type stuff. But, in my experience, small groups, programmatic small groups never really work. They never really work. And I think the reason is because they're programmatic, right? It's scheduled community. It's not really life on life. It's scheduled programmatic community. And it's generally not centered on one anothering. It's kind of a picture, and most of the time it's kind of a picture of what happens on Sunday morning, right? You have someone who's leading the group. You'll have songs, you know what I mean? Like, and, some form of communing together, whether that's food and all of that type stuff. And you'll have prayer. So it's just kind of like a smaller version of what you do on Sunday, right? And I've been in part of groups where there was, a little bit more intention on confession and, all of that type stuff. But the problem with that is that we assume that people who bear the name of Christ, we assume that just because someone claims Christ, that people are going to be open to sharing their truths. Like, I don't know this person sitting across from me. Like, it takes time. You know what I mean? And I don't know them. And again, like, we could say all day long, well, they're brothers and sisters, we should confess to one another. Yeah, but there has to be some foundation of relationship that's there, right? And oftentimes in those particular communities, what's shared, because there's usually a leader that's a part of those particular communities, someone who's, a leader within the church, whether they're a small group leader, they're committed to the leadership of that particular community, where if you do say something in that group or you do share in that group, then it finds its way back up to leadership. And then that breaks trust, right? It just breaks trust. And it actually works in opposite. It keeps people from being, transparent. Now, I'm not talking about things that are illegal and different things of that sort. I'm just talking about, people confessing things, maybe an addiction, maybe, bouts with, anger or, just things that, people can struggle with. And, but that trust often gets broken because it's shared. Right. And so people don't feel like they can be their authentic self. They don't feel like they can just be who they are within those particular groups. You know what I mean? Now, again, let's provide some balance. Some of that's on the person, right? Okay. So, sometimes people have the opportunity to be vulnerable, but they don't be vulnerable. I get that. But in this case, I'm talking about why is it that people who are deeply involved in these communities from every aspect, they attend a weekly service, they attend a small group within that community, may even serve in some capacity of that community. Why are they going outside of the community, or why are they still looking for community? Why is that still why is that still hard to find? And again, I speak to people regularly who are deeply involved in their community, but yet find that they can share their who they are with me or with the group, rather than sharing with people that they actually do community with weekly. And so I think this is a problem. I think this is a big problem for the church, right? I think this has a lot to do with the focus of community and what we've been focusing on. And in a lot of senses, what we've forgotten the purpose is, right? And I'm not saying that church community is not vertical, right? In the sense of, worshiping God is not an aspect of that, right? But a way that we worship God, and this is textual, this is scriptural, we love God by loving others. And so within that community, there needs to be deep one anothering. You see what I'm saying? That is an expression of our worship to the Lord is how we are expressing and meeting one another where we are. And our services, the way we do church, is just not set up for that. It's not set up for that. I mean, even communion is a very individualistic thing, right? It's, here, take your communion, here's your bread, here's your wine or your juice, depending on what flavor of Christianity you're a part of. And you go and self-reflect, and, you pray. It's a very, and take communion. It's a very individualistic thing. It's not a communal thing. And I think we missed that even in, Corinthians where it discusses, the abuse of communion. The abuse of communion in that particular context, as Paul is using body, is not necessarily saying examining yourself. Or let me put it this way. It is saying examine yourself, but it's telling you to examine yourself in light of how you treated the community. Have you offended one of your brothers or sisters because they were abusing communion by taking communion and eating prior to the people who had to work long schedules? So the rich were, who didn't work or didn't have to do all of those things, were taking communion before people could even get there. And so it wasn't a community thing. It was a very selfish thing. And he's like, listen, examine your body before you take this. He wasn't just saying examine yourself. He was saying, you need to look at the body and see if there's somebody who's been offended by your actions, right? So even community is a very communal thing, but the way we do Sunday gatherings, it's very individualistic. And so it's not built on community. And let's just be real. Let's just be real. We could say it all day long, but sometimes church is not a safe space to be able to share things. It's not a safe space to be able to share your doubts. It's not a safe space to be able to share, what's affecting you deeply. Sometimes it's just not a safe space, right? Sometimes those things are used as weapons against you, right? There has to be a space where people can be their authentic self, that they can get help from the community. I'm not talking about it being pawned off on leadership, where the community can actually one another and people could find healing in walking and doing life with one another. And that's going to take a complete opposite turn of what we consider to be the heart of gathering together. And this is where our current model of church will not, has very big issues with making this switch. Because if you take the emphasis off of what's done on Sundays and you place the emphasis on living amongst one another throughout the week, if everything is pointed towards that, then the support for that community will dramatically go down, right? People will stop giving money to the church or to the church community because they're actually meeting needs throughout the week. So that money will not go to the church to distribute. It'll actually go directly to people, right? So the funnel will break down. And that's not to say that churches are using that money for other things. I'm just saying that, there's a lot of things that are happening with churches. You got salaries, you got all kinds of stuff that are happening, right? So a part of the money that you're giving is not, all of the money that you're giving is not going out to help meet needs. Some of it's going to the lights and all of this stuff within buildings. And I'm not saying, that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's an excessive. Listen, okay. Anyway, I'm just stating the facts, I guess, is what I'm saying, right? If the focus changed off of Sunday and was meant more during the week, then I think it would change, right? Because the more people do life together, the more people walk with one another, the deeper those relationships get. And it doesn't even have to always be around, we need to gather around the word. People need to just be friends and to love one another and to meet each other's needs. And through that, natural conversation will happen. And that's impossible to happen in a 2-hour event on Sunday. But we place all of our energy on that 2-hour event when in reality, the emphasis of the Christian walk is really how you live on a daily basis, not what you do on the weekend. And that would be impossible for the church to change, right? Like, that would be very, very difficult for the church to change that model, because that would decentralize funds and the community, and it would strain what the church is actually doing. So again, it's a problem, that people can't find authentic community while they're actually in a community, that they feel lonely in a crowd, that they can't find authentic relationship because maybe things are too programmatic. Maybe there's a trust level that's there. Maybe there have been things that were said, whether from the pulpit or from others, that, there's a us versus them. If they struggle with something that, like a doctrine or a theology, they don't feel like they're capable of sharing their doubts with that. There's a lot of things that go into this. And it's just sad to me that people can't find community while they're in a community, right? But I think that has everything to do with how we've changed what community is and what community is supposed to be and how community is supposed to be done. Again, if we look at Acts 2, I'm not saying that, if we look at Acts 2, we see a community that was deeply tied to one another, who was able to meet the needs of one another, who were in deep fellowship with one another around the word, the gospel, and who loved one another deeply. And this was a regular thing. They met together, not because they were scheduled to meet, but because this was the rhythm of life that we're doing, right? That they were doing. And Christianity has become so programmatic that there is no rhythm to it, right? I got to go to, Bible study on Wednesday, you know what I'm saying? And Sunday is this, and choir rehearsal is this, right? Like, to be honest with you, it's like people's lives, again, are filled, during the week. How do they even know their neighbors if everything they're doing is pointed to what they're doing on Sunday? It's just crazy to me. So anyhow, just a thought. I thought it was very interesting, that there is a lot of people who are looking for community, who want to find community, and they're not finding it while being in a community. And I think this is something that the church needs to address and stop putting, stop guilting people, like making them the issue, right? Like, yeah, for some people are going to be the issue, but it's not everybody, I get tired of this thing where it's just like, hey, the church is not perfect. And so, the church is not perfect. So you got to come anyway. And, people are going to hurt you because there are hurt people there and all this stuff. But okay, but hold on. Like, why do those things exist? How are those things being addressed? Right? Why are we putting the onus on people versus actually diving into those things and seeking those things out? I'm not talking about just general sin. I'm not just talking about, imperfect people will create imperfect environments. I get that wholeheartedly. But when we just say things like, get over your hurt, all of that type stuff, and the church isn't perfect, and but we need to address what's happening. We need to address what's happening. And to be honest with you, this is why a lot of people kind of get angry. I won't say angry, kind of not feeling what I'm doing, because they feel like I'm tearing down the church. Right. But no, I want to hold the church accountable to what the church is. We need it from the inside and from the outside. Right. And there's a lot of people who are hurting and who have separated themselves from community for some of these things. And we got to correct them. We got to correct them, and just not saying it and being super positive and no, like we have to dive into this, and we got to have conversations about it. So anyway, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Perhaps you're a person who is struggling to find community. I would love to hear that from you. I know there's a lot of people out there, like I said, that are just, avoiding accountability and all that type stuff. Maybe so. But I don't think that that's everybody. And I don't think that's the majority of the people who are I think where people are getting clumped up into a particular idea in order to soothe the guilt of the church in terms of building authentic community with others. And so, if you have any comments on this, if you're a person who has felt this, we'd love to hear your comments. As always, drop a comment below. Keep the conversation moving forward. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in to Church Dropout. Talk to you soon. God bless.